So following off from the last video, I wanted to keep talking about consoles. And I figured, why not talk about generations of consoles? And I just recently thought of this. Less than a few minutes ago, I was brainstorming for a bit until I came across this idea for what to talk about, because my gut instinct was to keep talking about consoles for the next video, this one following the last one, but I just really wasn't sure of what to say at first. I didn't want to just talk about what's going on with Microsoft specifically, though there's definitely things to say, but I don't want to force it if I have nothing to say. I want to go with whatever feels most natural to me, you know? And it just feels natural to talk about, could console generations come to an end? And I beg that question. I ask such a question. I beg the question because, starting with the Switch, the first one specifically, it feels as if more and more we're getting away from the whole point of console generations, simply because it released in such, not even such an off year, but off month, March of 2017. We were not even a full 4 years into the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 yet by this point. And yet, here comes the Switch, not even headed fully into spring yet. Yes, I know March is considered the start to spring, the moment it turns to March from February. Many consider it to be spring, but
I'll have you all know that, actually, spring starts, during the spring equinox of March 21st or 22nd, depending on who you ask. Let's clarify that.
But, no, really, when it comes to when that console came out, it felt a bit odd for that reason, because of the timing of that. So now, because of that, it leads to me wondering, would the Switch, the first one, the OG, be considered the first 9th generation system, or is it its own thing entirely? Which, that's nothing new with Nintendo. They're known to do their own thing. But in the case of the Switch specifically, it was at a point where now this is starting with console generations as well, because with the Wii U, that came out the year prior to the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 in 2012, November of that year, whereas the PS4 and Xbox One came out in November of 2013. So Nintendo had a head start, but even then they still ended up coming last with the Wii U. They essentially used the Wii U, especially in retrospect, as the testing grounds for the success the Switch 1 and, by proxy, Switch 2 would end up being. And because of just how badly the Wii U had flopped, they needed to put out something that wasn't the 3DS, you know, something that was purely just a handheld, a proper home console of some kind, in order to get people buying whatever they put out again. Hence the Switch coming out. And obviously it was a smart move on Nintendo's part, and you look at how it's laid the groundwork for console handheld hybrids or similar devices to be a thing with the Steam Deck, for example, amongst other ones. But as a whole, it's something that really led to a massive divergence within proper console generations, which, again, the last proper one Nintendo seemed to be a part of in some way was the Wii U, and before that, the original Wii, and you could go further back. But point is, ever since the OG Switch, I've said that for the 100th time now, they very much have been off doing their own thing. Now you have the Switch 2, which released 8 years after the fact, in June of all months of 2025, this year obviously, no shit. So, more and more, it's just whenever Nintendo feels it's right to release a console, they are on their own cycle. Could this technically be considered the 10th generation console's beginning? Is the Switch 2 the first 10th gen system technically? Is it 9.5? I guess that's one way of looking at it. And you could also apply this to, well, obviously it's not the same because you're comparing pro versions of consoles to a brand new one, but maybe in a sense of being a 0.5 for a generation, a halfway point. You have Xbox and PlayStation having multiple different versions of consoles at different power levels, whereas with this generation, with Xbox, it's been, from the start, a weaker, more powerful version. With Sony, you had them repeating what they already did, and along with what Microsoft was doing in the 8th generation, of having one one console specifically to choose from at launch, and then years down the line, a few years down the line, 3 to 4 years down the line, that's when the Pro version comes out, which there's no denying. They obviously do have the most amount of power of each console, and that's important, which is there perhaps, though these things aren't mutually exclusive, could some make the argument that this has something to do potentially with consoles feeling less unique and more like PCs? Another factor as to why consoles feel less like consoles and more like a computer? Perhaps. Again, I don't think that's mutually exclusive, but I do think ultimately it could play a factor in why it's more than ever. It's about, in the case of Xbox and PlayStation, just focusing solely on them right now, why it's all about these consoles just competing with one another, even if neither one really feels like they're properly competing. Not even Sony feels like they're properly competing, and what are they supposed to even compete with? See, that's another thing. We're reaching a point where competition isn't a thing as much as it used to be. Have you guys noticed that in the case of fanboys going at it, in the case of not even just gaming, but other forms of entertainment, you're not having communities and fandoms facing off like they used to even a decade ago? I look at games like COD versus Battlefield or COD versus Halo, and how the last time that was a thing was in 2013 with Battlefield 4 and Ghosts. COD Ghosts, for those who don't remember. I don't blame you. But when I think of games such as those competing, that's the last time I can think of that being a thing. When it comes to just that off the top of my head. I don't see that same type of competition with a lot of games, or just a lot of things like I used to. And I think that in part, looping back around to the point of this video, plays a factor in why generations really don't feel like they're as much of a thing as they used to be, and they're less exciting than ever. I'm not going to feel any excitement when it comes to the next Xbox and PlayStation. I've already gone into detail about that, but just going off of what I'm saying here, I think that I think I'm very much going to feel the same, if not even more so than I already do feel, come the proper next gen, which, I mean, who knows how these consoles are going to even look when they release, outside of even just being a proper home console device. Something I theorized years ago, especially on my previous channel with videos there, was the idea of maybe consoles could be more like not disk drives, little fat flash drives that you plug into your TV, and that's the console experience. Or the controller itself is the console. Things like that, where it's more about the devices themselves. And that just goes into the whole lack of monoculture and focus on individualistic mindset that the entertainment world really has nowadays, which there's so much to say about that. I'm not going to get too off topic here, just when it comes down to it, it just really still, again, feels like a byproduct of this environment and culture that we live in, whatever you even want to call it at this point. Everything is just very much sporadic. It's its own thing. It's very much just ties into a point I've heard before. I even mentioned this in the previous video. It's more about, in the case of gaming, the games themselves than the consoles that people care about investing their time into, and that really says a lot. So when it comes to the future of generations of consoles, honestly, I think it's going to reach a point where we're not going to even have proper generations anymore. Just whenever a company wants to put out a new console, whether it's Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, when they feel it's time and ready for the next one, then they put it out. Yeah, sure, Microsoft and Sony are still competitors, but at the same time, they really aren't anymore. Microsoft doesn't care to compete. Nintendo does their own thing. Microsoft, again, they're very much doing their own thing when it comes to being very third-party focused, because it's all about Game Pass sales. And then you have Sony just doing their thing, them copying Microsoft when it comes to putting their games on all different platforms. I'm sure in the future we'll see Last of Us on the Xbox 7000. Maybe they'll call it the Xbox 720. I would love if they genuinely went with that. That alone would give me a reason to care. Okay, maybe I'd more so be amused than actually care, but that would be cool for the shits and giggles, you know, for the throwback for those who were old enough to remember that era of the internet. 720 versus PlayStation 4, or as it was once temporarily called, the PlayStation Orb, before it was called the PS4, because that would make a lot of sense. But console generations are just in a really weird place. Consoles, again, are in a strange place. It's all just a bit disorganized. There's no coherency there. It's just whatever you want to buy is whatever you buy, especially if you can even afford it at that point with how expensive a lot of things are. PlayStation seems to not be falling into the tariffs right now with price increases, but hey, we'll see what happens in the future, right? But that's what I wanted to say for this video when it comes to consoles again, when it comes to console generations. That's my thoughts. What are yours? Leave them in the comment section below. And with that being said, that's going to be the video. Hope you enjoyed. If you didn't, that's fine. Leave a like or dislike. Subscribe. Turn on notifications and set it to all. When it comes to the notification bell, make sure to join the open Discord server. There's also a join membership for $2.99 a month that has a few perks. And all I can say is thanks for watching, and I'll see you for the next one. Till then, I'm out. Later.